Before we delve into this story, a brief word of caution. The events and sounds described may be deeply unsettling and explore themes of isolation, fear, and the unknown. Listener discretion is advised. Imagine finding a relic of the past, a dusty old cassette tape, not in an attic or a forgotten drawer, but deep in a forest where no human sound should ever exist. Imagine pressing play, expecting the gentle rustle of leaves, maybe a distant bird call. Instead, you hear something else entirely, something that shouldn't be possible, something that makes the silence of those woods feel like a lie, and the hairs on your arm stand on end, because what you hear suggests a presence, a terror, that defies all logic and natural law. This isn't just a story about a chilling discovery. It's a descent into an enigma, a puzzle pieced together from fragments of static and distorted whispers, leading us down a path where the familiar world dissolves into something far more ancient and terrifying. Our story begins with Michael Anderson, a man who found his truest self not in the cacophony of cities, but in the profound, almost spiritual quiet of the wilderness. Michael was a seasoned outdoorsman, a cartographer by trade, which meant his days were often spent deep in uncharted or rarely traversed terrains, mapping the forgotten corners of the American landscape. He didn't just walk through forests, he felt them, breathed them, understood their silent language. For him, the woods were a sanctuary, a place of unparalleled peace and clarity. Among all the vast expanses he'd explored, there was one particular forest that held a unique, almost mystical allure for Michael: the Blackwood Forest. Nestled deep in a remote, mountainous region, the Blackwood wasn't just large, it was ancient. Its trees, towering sentinels of oak and pine, had stood for centuries, their gnarled branches reaching towards a sky often obscured by a perpetual canopy. But what truly set Blackwood apart, what gave it its haunting reputation, was its silence. Not just a quiet silence, mind you. This was an unnerving silence. A silence so profound that it often felt as if the very air had been sucked out of the world. Birds rarely sang there. Insects, usually a constant hum in any forest, were conspicuously absent. Even the wind, when it stirred the leaves, seemed to do so with a hushed reverence, almost a whisper, as if afraid to break the pervasive stillness. Locals spoke of it in hushed tones, some claiming the Blackwood was a place where sound simply went to die, others believing something far more sinister enforced its eerie quiet. For Michael, it was a challenge, a mystery, and above all a place of profound solitude that called to his very soul. It was late autumn, a crisp October day, when Michael ventured deeper into the Blackwood than he ever had before. He was on a solo expedition, mapping a series of previously undocumented ravines and rock formations that snaked through the forest's interior. He carried his usual gear: GPS, topographical maps, a sturdy pack filled with supplies, and a high-quality field recorder. He liked to capture ambient sounds, the subtle shifts in the wind, the distant rush of a hidden stream, to add texture to his mental maps. But in Blackwood, his recorder often picked up little more than an almost deafening emptiness. He spent days trekking, the only sounds his own footsteps crunching on fallen leaves and the rhythmic thud of his heart. The silence, as always, was absolute, heavy, almost a physical presence. On the fourth day, as the sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of fiery orange and deep violet, Michael found himself at the edge of a particularly deep gorge, its sides shrouded in moss and ancient ferns. He was off his planned route, drawn by an instinct, a feeling that something significant lay hidden here. He carefully descended into the gorge, the air growing colder, heavier with each step. The light barely penetrated here, creating an ethereal twilight gloom even in the late afternoon. He navigated through a tangle of roots and crumbling rocks until he came upon a small, almost perfectly circular clearing at the very bottom. In the center of this clearing, nestled between the roots of a colossal ancient oak, lay something that caught his eye immediately. It was an old, battered metal box, rusted and half buried in the damp earth, barely visible beneath a layer of decaying leaves. It looked like a military ammunition box, but smaller, perhaps a first aid kit from decades past. Curiosity, a driving force in Michael's life, compelled him to kneel and pry it open. The hinges groaned in protest, a surprisingly loud sound in the stifling silence. Inside, cushioned by layers of dried, brittle leaves, lay a single, very old cassette tape. It was dark gray, with a label that had long since faded into an unreadable smear. There was no cassette player, no other contents in the box, just this single enigmatic tape. Michael stared at it, a strange feeling creeping up his spine. Who would leave a cassette tape here, in such a remote, almost inaccessible part of a forest known for its absolute silence? And why in such a peculiar container? He carefully picked it up. It felt heavy, substantial, almost as if it held a secret burden. The plastic casing was intact, though scuffed and grimy. He turned it over in his hand, 1,000 questions swirling in his mind. The rational part of him suggested it was just forgotten junk, a relic from a lost hiker or a prank. But the deeper, more primal part, the part that understood the Blackwood's unique nature, told him otherwise. This tape felt important, felt wrong. He secured the tape safely in a watertight pouch in his pack. The remaining hours of daylight were spent making his way back to his campsite, the cassette a constant, unsettling weight against his back. The silence of the Blackwood felt different now, imbued with a new layer of mystery. It was no longer just peaceful. It felt like a watchful, waiting presence. The next morning, Michael packed up camp and began the long trek out of the forest. He barely registered the usual fatigue, his mind consumed by the cassette. He couldn't wait to get home, to retrieve his old, rarely used cassette player from the attic, and finally unravel the secret of the Blackwood tape. The drive back to his small, isolated cabin, nestled on the edge of a different, more ordinary forest, felt interminable. Finally home. He wasted no time. Digging through dusty boxes, he found his ancient Sony Walkman, miraculously still functional. He cleaned the heads, inserted fresh batteries, and with a mix of trepidation and anticipation, he gently slid the Blackwood cassette into the player. He connected the Walkman to his high-quality headphones, wanting to catch every nuance, every whisper. He took a deep breath, the air in his cabin suddenly feeling thick with unspoken tension. His finger hovered over the play button. What would he hear? The rustle of ancient leaves? A forgotten song? Or perhaps nothing at all, just the hiss of blank tape, a testament to the Blackwood's profound silence. He pressed play. For a few agonizing seconds there was only a faint, almost imperceptible hiss, the sound of the tape rolling. Then slowly, subtly the recording began. It was at first exactly what he expected, the ambient sounds of a forest. The gentle, almost imperceptible whisper of wind through leaves, a distant, faint rustle. It was quiet, yes, but not the oppressive, unnatural silence of the Blackwood. This was a normal, healthy forest soundscape. Then the sounds began to shift. The wind seemed to pick up, carrying with it a new element. A faint, rhythmic thump-thump. It was low, heavy, and strangely deliberate. Not footsteps, not entirely. More like something being dragged, or perhaps something moving with great effort through the undergrowth. It was too regular, too heavy to be an animal. Michael felt a prickle of unease. The thumping grew slightly louder, closer, accompanied now by a low, guttural sound. It wasn't a growl, not exactly. More like a deep, mournful moan. A sound that seemed to vibrate from something ancient and suffering. It sent a shiver down his spine. This wasn't natural. This wasn't any creature he knew. The sounds were distorted, as if recorded through a veil of water or thick fog, but undeniably real. Then a sudden sharp crack ripped through the recording, like a thick branch snapping under immense pressure. It was followed by a choked, desperate gasp, undeniably human. A sound of pure, unadulterated terror. Michael froze, his blood turning to ice. A human voice. In the Blackwood. And then the most unsettling sound of all. A strange, high-pitched whirring began, like old, rusty machinery grinding to life, slowly building in intensity. A mechanical shriek that seemed to burrow directly into his skull. It wasn't a natural sound, not even close. It was alien, industrial, utterly out of place in any forest, let alone the Blackwood. The whirring peaked, then slowly, agonizingly began to fade, descending into a low hum, then silence. A click. The tape had reached its end. Michael sat there, headphones still clamped to his ears, the silence of his cabin now feeling far more menacing than the silence of the Blackwood. The forest he knew, the sanctuary he cherished, had just revealed a secret so profound, so utterly horrifying, that it shattered his perception of reality. The Blackwood wasn't silent because sound went to die there. It was silent because something was enforcing that silence. And whatever it was, it had recorded its presence, its actions on that forgotten cassette tape. He had just heard the impossible. He had just heard the true, terrifying voice of the silent woods. And he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, that this was only the beginning. Michael stood frozen, the tiny speakers of the old cassette player spitting static, a phantom echo of the impossible sound still ringing in his ears. His breath hitched, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He had heard it, clear as day, a sound that defied every natural law he knew, every scientific principle he held sacred. It wasn't a growl, not a howl, not the rustle of leaves or the snap of a twig. It was a voice, but not a human voice, not an animal voice. It was something else entirely, an intricate pattern of guttural clicks and low, resonant tones that seemed to carry an undeniable, chilling intelligence. His hand, trembling, reached for the rewind button. He had to be mistaken. His imagination, fueled by the isolation of the woods and the eerie silence, must have conjured it. He pressed play again, his heart hammering against his ribs. The familiar, comforting sounds of the forest returned. The distant hoot of an owl, the gentle rustle of leaves, the faint chirp of crickets. Then, at the exact same point, like a glitch in reality itself, it happened again. A sudden, sharp intake of breath, not his own, but something impossibly close to the microphone, followed by that sequence of alien sounds. It was brief, perhaps 5 seconds at most, but each second was an eternity of terror. He replayed it a third time, then a fourth, his ear practically pressed against the speaker, dissecting every nuance. He tried to rationalize it. A rare bird? A unique insect? A trick of the wind? But the sound possessed a complexity, a deliberate rhythm that spoke of more than instinct. It was structured. It had a beginning, a middle, and an end, like a phrase, a communication. The low frequencies vibrated through him. A primal chord struck deep within his ancient fear centers. The high-pitched clicks were sharp, almost percussive, like stone on stone, yet organic. It was a language, he realized with a horrifying certainty. A language spoken by something that should not exist, hidden deep within the woods he had always believed to be silent. Michael slumped onto his worn armchair, the cassette player now silent on the coffee table, a cold, dead weight in the room. His mind raced, trying to process the impossible. He was a man of science, a meticulous researcher. He trusted data, evidence, verifiable facts. But what he had just heard defied all logic. It was an anomaly so profound it threatened to unravel his entire understanding of the natural world. How could he explain this? Who would believe him? He pictured himself trying to present this tape to his colleagues, their polite smiles turning to thinly veiled pity, their whispers of mental fatigue or of vivid imagination. The thought sent a fresh wave of despair through him. He was alone with this, utterly, terrifyingly alone. For hours, he sat in the dim glow of his living room, the world outside hushed by the late hour. He replayed that segment countless times, each listen deepening the dread, each listen cementing the reality of what he had recorded. He even tried running the audio through some basic spectral analysis software on his laptop, a relic from his old research days. The visual representation of the sound was as bizarre as the sound itself. Unnatural peaks and valleys, frequencies that didn't correspond to any known animal vocalization database he had access to. It was a signature unlike anything he had ever seen, a fingerprint of the impossible. The initial shock slowly began to morph into something else, a gnawing curiosity, a desperate need for answers. He couldn't just dismiss this. It was too real, too undeniably present on that analog tape. But he couldn't face it alone. He needed a second pair of ears, a professional, someone who understood the intricacies of sound. His mind immediately went to Jessica Miller, a former classmate from his university days, now a highly respected audio engineer. She had an ear for the subtlest nuances, a mind like a steel trap for technical details, and a healthy skepticism that bordered on cynicism. If anyone could debunk this, it was Jessica. If anyone could confirm it, it was also Jessica. He hesitated. Calling her in the middle of the night would be strange, but he couldn't wait. The tape felt like a ticking bomb, its secret burning a hole in his conscience. He grabbed his phone, his fingers hovering over her contact. What would he even say? "Hey, I recorded something in the woods, and I think it's an alien speaking." He chuckled humorlessly, the sound hollow in the quiet room. He decided to be vague, to pique her interest without sounding deranged. He sent her a text. "Jess, urgent. Got a recording I need your expert opinion on. Can you meet me first thing in the morning? It's unlike anything I've ever encountered." Her reply was almost immediate. "Ugh, Michael, it's 2 a.m. Urgent, better involve a UFO landing or a lost Beethoven symphony. Fine. Coffee shop near your place, 8 a.m. Don't be late. A small flicker of relief ignited within him. He wasn't entirely alone anymore. But the relief was short-lived, quickly overshadowed by a fresh wave of anxiety. What if Jessica, with all her expertise, couldn't explain it either? What if she confirmed his worst fears? Sleep became an impossible luxury. Every shadow in his apartment seemed to lengthen. Every creak of the old house sounded like footsteps. He kept replaying the sound in his head, a constant loop of alien clicks and guttural tones. He found himself imagining the creature that made those sounds, lurking just beyond the edge of his perception, watching him. The woods, once a sanctuary, now felt like a vast, dark maw, waiting to swallow him whole. The cassette, lying innocently on the table, felt like a portal, a direct line to something ancient and malevolent. He couldn't shake the feeling that by recording it, he had somehow disturbed it, awakened it, or worse, invited it. The silence of the woods had been a lie, a carefully constructed illusion. And he, Michael, with his naive pursuit of natural sounds, had unwittingly stumbled upon the truth. He had pulled back the curtain, and what he saw, what he heard, was far more terrifying than any monster story. It was the sound of a world that shouldn't be, existing alongside his own, hidden in plain sight. As the first sliver of dawn painted the sky a pale gray, Michael was already showered, dressed, and meticulously packing his recording equipment, including the infamous cassette, into a padded case. He felt a strange mix of dread and exhilaration. He was on the precipice of something monumental. This wasn't just a strange anomaly. This was a revelation, a secret that could change everything. The question was, would it save him or consume him? He had to know. He had to understand what he had unleashed. The woods were no longer just a place. They were a question, a challenge, a silent threat that had finally found its voice. And he, Michael, was now inextricably bound to its terrifying secret. The silence of his apartment felt heavier than usual that night, a stark, mocking contrast to the chaotic whispers trapped on the tape. Michael couldn't sleep. The horrifying implications of what he'd heard, what he'd uncovered, gnawed at him. The woods weren't silent. They never had been. They were just unheard. Until now. And he was the one who had finally given them a voice. He spent hours hunched over his makeshift audio setup, a pair of high-quality headphones pressed tight against his ears, the cassette player whirring softly. He tried every trick he knew, every software filter, every equalization adjustment, desperately attempting to peel back the layers of static and distortion. He isolated frequencies, amplified whispers, even reversed sections, hoping for a clearer word, a coherent phrase, anything that would make sense of the fragmented pleas and chilling, almost mechanical hums. But the tape resisted. It was like trying to catch smoke or grasp at shadows. Just when he thought he had a grip on a sound, it would dissolve, twisting into something else, something even more unsettling. The voices remained just out of reach, spectral echoes of distress, always on the verge of forming a recognizable word, only to dissipate into an agonizing, drawn-out moan or a breathy gasp. It was maddening. He felt like a detective with a crucial piece of evidence that refused to confess. The mechanical hum was the most consistent, the most disturbing. It wasn't a natural sound. It wasn't the wind or insects or even distant machinery. It had a rhythmic, almost deliberate quality, a low thrum that vibrated deep in his chest, a sound that felt ancient and alien all at once. It was the sound of something else being present, something that wasn't supposed to be there, something that defied the very nature of the forest. Frustration mounted, quickly giving way to a cold, hard resolve. The tape was only one piece of the puzzle. He needed context. He needed history. If these woods had been harboring such a secret, if voices had been trapped within their unnatural quiet for decades, perhaps centuries, then there had to be some record, some faint echo in the annals of local lore or forgotten news reports. He turned from his audio equipment to his laptop, the screen a stark blue glow in the pre-dawn darkness. He started broad typing Blackwood Forest unusual occurrences, local legends town name woods, unexplained disappearances Blackwood Forest. The initial results were a mixed bag of cryptic forum posts, sensationalist local blog entries, and vague historical anecdotes about unlucky hikers. Nothing concrete, nothing that resonated with the chilling specificity of the cassette. He refined his search, adding keywords like silence, unnatural quiet, strange sounds. That's when a different kind of result began to surface. Not direct links to the tape, of course, but a recurring theme. Multiple old newspaper clippings, digitized and archived, spanning back to the 1970s, consistently mentioned the unearthly stillness of certain parts of Blackwood Forest. One particular article, dated October 1978, caught his eye. The headline was stark: "Local woman vanishes in Blackwood Forest, search efforts hampered by eerie quiet." The article detailed the disappearance of a young woman named Emily Davies, just 22 years old, who had gone hiking with her boyfriend David Clark in a remote section of the forest. According to David's frantic account, Emily had simply walked ahead on the trail, and when he looked up moments later, she was gone, vanished without a trace. What truly sent a jolt of ice through Michael was a quote attributed to one of the search and rescue volunteers. "It was the strangest thing. You expect to hear birds, squirrels, the rustle of leaves. But out there where she disappeared, it was just nothing. An unnatural quiet. Like the air itself had swallowed all sound." The words practically leaped off the screen, a direct echo of Michael's own experience, the very reason he'd named the woods Silent in the first place. The connection, though indirect, was undeniable. He felt a prickle on the back of his neck, a sense of eerie synchronicity. Could Emily Davies be one of the voices on that tape? Could her desperate final moments be captured in those fragmented whispers? He dug deeper into the Emily Davies case. Follow-up articles detailed extensive search efforts that yielded nothing. No footprints, no discarded items, no sign of a struggle. David Clark, her boyfriend, was initially questioned aggressively, even considered a suspect, but was eventually cleared. His story remained consistent. Emily was there one moment, gone the next. He reiterated his chilling observation to reporters. It was like the world just sucked all the sound out of the air right where she disappeared. Felt wrong. It felt hungry. Hungry. The word reverberated in Michael's mind, a grim compliment to the mechanical hum on the tape. He found a grainy photo of Emily Davies accompanying one of the articles. A smiling young woman with bright eyes, her life abruptly cut short, her fate an enduring mystery. Her disappearance, like so many others he now scanned through, was never solved. No body was ever found. The woods had simply claimed her. As Michael read, a new terrifying hypothesis began to form. What if the silence wasn't just an absence of sound, but a feature? What if it was a predatory mechanism, a way the woods disoriented, isolated, and ultimately consumed? And what if the tape wasn't just a recording from the woods, but a recording of the woods, capturing the last sonic echoes of those it had devoured? He thought about the fragmented whispers again. They weren't just random sounds. They were human, distressed, pleading. They sounded like someone trying desperately to communicate, to be heard, to break through an impenetrable barrier. And the mechanical hum, could it be the sound of whatever caused the silence? Whatever entity or phenomenon was responsible for these disappearances? The thought was monstrous, but it fit. It explained the unnatural quiet, the sudden vanishing acts, the feeling of wrongness David Clark had described. It explained the tape. Michael felt a profound, sickening sense of responsibility. He had wandered into those woods, drawn by their unique stillness. He had found a relic, a cassette recorder, a relic of a past tragedy. And by playing it, by listening, he had unknowingly opened a door. He had given voice to the unheard, and in doing so, he had become entangled in a decades-old, perhaps even centuries-old nightmare. The digital archives, while illuminating, could only take him so far. There were gaps, missing pieces, the frustrating brevity of old news reports. He needed more. He needed the dusty files, the forgotten microfiches, the whispered local histories that never made it online. He needed to go to the source. The local public library, the town hall, the historical society. These places, often overlooked in the digital age, held the physical remnants of the past, the paper trails of lives lived and lost, of mysteries unsolved. He imagined old filing cabinets, brittle newspaper clippings, perhaps even police reports from Emily Davies' disappearance. A cold dread settled in his stomach, but it was accompanied by an unshakable determination. He had to know. He had to understand what had truly happened in those silent, hungry woods. He had to give meaning to the desperate whispers on that cassette. He felt an invisible pull, as if the woods themselves were guiding him, or perhaps luring him, deeper into their terrifying secret, drawing him inexorably towards the truth. The truth, Michael realized, wasn't going to simply present itself. It was hidden, guarded, and he had to be the one to unearth it. The next morning, a thick, oppressive fog clung to the town, blurring the edges of the familiar world and making the woods seem even more remote, more ancient. He spent the morning meticulously preparing. His old hiking backpack, usually reserved for weekend excursions, was now packed with a purpose that chilled him to the bone. He included a high-powered flashlight, extra batteries, a first aid kit, a compass, a sturdy hunting knife, and a small foldable shovel. Most importantly, the portable cassette player, along with the chilling recording, was carefully placed in an inner pocket, ready to be consulted at a moment's notice. Before he left, he called his friend, David, a fellow enthusiast of local legends and an amateur historian. Michael kept his voice steady, trying to sound casual, but the tremor in his hands betrayed him. He told David he was going to explore a new section of the old abandoned logging trails, hoping to find some interesting historical remnants. He knew David would pick up on the slight hesitation, the forced nonchalance, but he couldn't bring himself to share the full, terrifying truth of the cassette yet. Not until he had something more concrete, something that wouldn't make him sound completely unhinged. David, ever the curious one, wished him luck and reminded him to be careful, a warning that echoed ominously in Michael's ears. As he drove to the edge of the woods, the fog grew denser, reducing visibility to mere yards. The ancient trees along the perimeter loomed like silent sentinels, their branches dripping with moisture, creating a constant, soft patter on the forest floor, a sound that seemed to absorb all others. He parked his car off a rarely used dirt road, hidden from view by a thicket of overgrown bushes. The air was heavy, still, and charged with an almost palpable energy. He took a deep breath, the cold, damp air filling his lungs, and then stepped out, the crunch of his boots on fallen leaves sounding unnaturally loud in the profound silence. The initial steps into the woods felt like crossing a threshold into another dimension. The familiar scent of pine and damp earth was there, but beneath it, a faint metallic tang, almost like old blood, seemed to cling to the air. The fog wrapped around him, distorting shapes, turning every gnarled branch into a reaching hand, every rustle of leaves into a whisper. He knew this forest had hiked its trails countless times, but today it was utterly alien. The comforting landmarks were swallowed by the mist, leaving him adrift in a monochrome world of grays and greens. He pulled out the cassette player, the worn plastic feeling like a lifeline in his hand. He pressed play, the faint hiss of the tape filling the oppressive silence. He let the frantic whispers, the desperate pleas, wash over him again, trying to discern any new detail, any subtle inflection he might have missed. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning the fog-shrouded trees, the underbrush, the ground. He wasn't looking for a trail. He was looking for a sign, an anomaly, anything that didn't belong. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only an hour, the woods began to shift. The trees grew older, their trunks thicker, their branches more entangled, forming a canopy that even the fog struggled to penetrate fully. The ground became uneven, littered with moss-covered rocks and fallen logs. He was moving deeper now, far from any established path. The luring sensation intensified, a quiet hum beneath his skin, urging him forward, deeper into the unknown. Then he saw it. Through a momentary thinning of the fog, a faint unnatural discoloration on the bark of an ancient oak tree. He approached cautiously, his heart hammering against his ribs. It wasn't paint, nor was it natural lichen. It was a symbol crudely carved but distinct into the rough bark. It was a circle, bisected by a jagged line, with 3 smaller dots arranged in an arc above it. It looked tribal, ancient, yet somehow starkly modern in its simplicity. It sent a shiver down his spine. He had never seen anything like it in any of his local history books or folklore research. Felt wrong. He pulled out his phone, snapping a few quick photos, though the fog made them blurry and indistinct. He then continued, keeping the symbol in his mind, wondering what it could mean. Was it a marker? A warning? A few hundred yards further, the air grew noticeably colder, despite the lack of wind. The ground sloped gently downwards, leading him into a shallow depression. Here the fog seemed to pool, thicker than ever, making it hard to see more than a few feet in front of him. He pressed play on the cassette player again, listening intently. The frantic female voice, the one that had first captivated him, seemed to echo in the damp, heavy air, as if she had stood right here. And then he found it. A makeshift campsite, barely visible through the swirling mist. It consisted of a crude lean-to fashioned from branches and tarps, half collapsed and overgrown with moss. A fire pit, long cold, was ringed with blackened stones, and scattered around it were remnants of a forgotten existence. A rusty tin can, a tattered, faded blanket, a broken ceramic mug. This wasn't a recent camp, he thought. It must have been abandoned years ago. But then, his gaze fell upon something else. Partially buried beneath a layer of damp leaves, near the collapsed lean-to, was a small canvas backpack, stained and weathered, but clearly more recent than the rest of the campsite's decay. His breath hitched. This was it. This was a direct link. He knelt, his fingers trembling as he carefully brushed away the leaves. The backpack, though old, hadn't completely disintegrated. The zipper was stiff, rusted in place. He had to use the blade of his hunting knife to pry it open, the metallic groan of the zipper piercing the silence. Inside, amidst a layer of grime and damp earth, he found a few items. A worn leather-bound journal, its pages swollen and warped by moisture. A small, tarnished silver locket, its hinge broken. And finally, a faded, crumpled photograph. He carefully extracted the photograph. It was a picture of 3 young people, 2 women and 1 man, smiling brightly against a backdrop of sun-drenched trees. They looked to be in their early 20s, full of life, full of hope. One of the women had bright, intelligent eyes and a cascade of fiery red hair. The other woman was blonde, with a mischievous grin. The man, tall and lanky, had an arm around each of them, his smile wide and genuine. They looked like friends, perhaps on an adventure, full of the carefree spirit of youth. A jolt went through Michael as he looked at the blonde woman. Her face, it was familiar. He had seen it before, in a missing persons report from years ago, one of the local cold cases that occasionally resurfaced. Emily Thorne. She had vanished from these very woods almost 15 years ago, along with her friend, Jessica Miller, the woman with the red hair in the picture. The third person, the man, was Mark Jenkins, also reported missing at the same time. His blood ran cold. This wasn't just some random old campsite. This was their campsite. The people on the cassette. He felt a profound, chilling certainty. The journal, the locket, the photograph. They were all pieces of a puzzle he was now holding in his hands. He carefully placed the photograph back in the backpack, then picked up the journal. Its leather cover was cracked, the pages brittle. He opened it gently, hoping to find answers, dreading what he might discover. The ink on the first few pages was faded but legible, detailing mundane entries about setting up camp, exploring, and the beauty of the woods. But as he turned the pages, the tone shifted. The handwriting became more frantic, the entries shorter, more fragmented. Day 5, strange sounds at night. Not animals. Like whispers. Wind playing tricks. Day 7. Mark swears he saw something moving in the trees, a shadow too quick to be real. Emily is getting nervous. Jessica thinks it's just the isolation. Day 9. The whispers are clearer now. Calling our names. It's coming from everywhere and nowhere. We packed up, but we can't find the path out. Everything looks the same. Day 10, we're lost. The woods are different. They don't want us to leave. The sounds, they're getting closer. They're laughing now. Not human laughter. Michael's hand shook violently. He was reading the last entries of these vanished people. The journal was a terrifying echo of the cassette recording. He flipped to the very last page, barely held together by a single thread. The ink was smeared, as if written in haste or in the dark. Day 11, it found us. It's not human. It's inside the trees. It sees through the leaves. Hears everything. It wants us to stay. Forever. The whispers, they're telling us to be silent. Don't make a sound. Don't let it. The entry ended abruptly, the final word trailing off into an illegible smudge. A cold dread seeped into Michael's bones. Colder than the fog. Colder than the damp earth. The journal was a testament to their final terrifying moments. It confirmed his worst fears. Something truly sinister had happened here. As he closed the journal, its ancient leather creaking mournfully, a sudden sharp crack echoed through the silent woods. It wasn't the sound of a branch falling, or an animal stepping on a twig. It was the distinct, deliberate snap of a heavy branch, close by, as if something large had just broken it. Michael froze, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The fog seemed to swirl around him, thickening, pressing in. He gripped his hunting knife, his knuckles white. He was no longer just an explorer. He was a trespasser. And whatever had claimed Emily, Jessica, and Mark, whatever was inside these woods, knew he was there. Its silence was no longer peaceful. It was a suffocating, predatory silence, waiting for him to make the next move. Its silence was no longer peaceful. It was a suffocating, predatory silence, waiting for him to make the next move. David felt a cold dread seep into his bones, colder than the damp forest air. His breath hitched, ragged and loud in the unnatural quiet. Every nerve ending screamed, demanding he run, but his feet felt rooted to the earth. He was no longer an observer, no longer a curious explorer. He was prey. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. This wasn't just a place where people got lost. This was a place where something took them. He swallowed hard, the sound amplified in the oppressive stillness. His eyes darted from tree to tree, searching, scrutinizing every shadow, every cluster of ferns. There was nothing. No rustle of leaves, no snapping twig, no visible movement. Yet, the sensation of being under an invisible gaze was so potent, so absolute, it felt like a weight pressing down on him, crushing the hope from his spirit. His heart hammered against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat in a world holding its breath. He had to move. He had to get out. Carefully, meticulously, David began to back away, one slow, deliberate step after another. Each footfall was an agonizing decision, a gamble against the unseen. He tried to retrace his steps, to follow the faint indentations he'd made in the soft earth, but the forest floor seemed to shift beneath him, the path he thought he'd taken dissolving into a uniform carpet of decaying leaves and moss. The trees, once a comforting canopy, now loomed like skeletal sentinels, their branches intertwining into an impenetrable maze. He took another step back, then another, his hands instinctively reaching for the small, heavy flashlight clipped to his belt, though he knew its beam would offer little comfort against an unseen enemy. His fingers fumbled with the clasp, the simple act feeling monumental in his state of terror. As he finally gripped the flashlight, a sound, so subtle it was almost imperceptible, reached his ears. It wasn't a branch breaking, nor an animal scuttling. It was a faint, almost mechanical click. Just one. Sharp and distinct, yet impossibly distant, as if it had emanated from inside his own head. David froze, every muscle tensed. He squeezed his eyes shut for a fraction of a second, then snapped them open, scanning the dense foliage around him with renewed desperation. The click hadn't come from his flashlight. It hadn't come from his cassette player, which was still secured in his bag. It was alien, a sound that had no place in the natural world, a sound that resonated with the chilling, distorted noises from Emily's recording. The silence that followed was even more profound, more unsettling. It felt like the woods were holding their breath, waiting for him to react. David's mind raced, trying to rationalize, to dismiss it as a phantom sound, a trick of his frayed nerves. But the cold certainty in his gut told him otherwise. This was a response, a signal. He had to get out. But which way? The direction he'd come from now felt like a wall, impenetrable and hostile. Every tree looked the same. Every shadow deepened into an abyss. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of his control. He ran a hand through his hair, tugging at the strands, trying to clear his thoughts. Then, his gaze fell upon something unnatural, something that snagged his attention and momentarily eclipsed his fear. Tucked beneath the gnarled roots of an ancient oak, half buried in the leaf litter, was a small, vibrant splash of color. It was a piece of fabric, a bright, almost fluorescent green that stood out starkly against the muted browns and greens of the forest floor. David approached it cautiously, his heart still thrumming a frantic rhythm. He knelt down, pushing aside the decaying leaves. It was a small waterproof pouch, the kind often used by hikers to protect electronics or documents. It was open, slightly torn, and inside, nestled amongst some dry leaves, was a small worn leather-bound notebook. And next to it, partially obscured, a small silver locket. The locket was simple, unadorned, but it felt heavy in his palm. He snapped it open with a trembling thumb. Inside, two faded photographs. A smiling young woman with bright, curious eyes, and a man with a kind, reassuring smile. Emily. And Mark. A wave of nausea washed over David. This wasn't just a clue. It was a devastating confirmation. This was Emily's pouch. Her notebook. Her locket. The raw, personal intimacy of the item sent a fresh jolt of fear through him. She hadn't just lost these things. They had been left behind, perhaps dropped in a struggle, or intentionally discarded. He carefully opened the notebook. The pages were damp, some stuck together, but the handwriting, though faded, was still legible. It was Emily's journal. He recognized her distinctive cursive from the brief glimpses he'd had of her notes on the recordings. He flipped through the first few pages, his eyes scanning for anything, any hint. Most of it was mundane, observations about the forest, scientific notes on flora and fauna, musings on the beauty of nature. But then, as he turned a page, a particular entry leaped out at him. The date was smudged, but it was clearly from the period shortly before her disappearance. Asterisk day 7 in the deeper zone. The silence is profound, almost too profound. Jessica says it's peaceful. Mark thinks it's unnerving. I'm starting to agree with Mark. We haven't seen any large wildlife for days. Not even birds. It's like everything has fled, or been driven away. And the recordings, they're getting stranger. More than just static. There's a pattern, a rhythm, and sometimes a faint, almost imperceptible hum. It's not mechanical. It's organic. Like something vast breathing. Asterisk. David's blood ran cold. Asterisk a hum. Organic. Something vast breathing. Asterisk this echoed the unsettling feeling he'd had, the sense of an unseen living presence. Emily had felt it too. She had documented it. He flipped to the next page, his fingers trembling. Asterisk day 9. The hum is stronger now. It's not constant, it comes and goes like a heartbeat. But it's not a heartbeat I recognize. It's too slow, too deep. And it's not coming from any specific direction. It feels like it's coming from everywhere, from the very ground beneath us, from the air itself. We tried to triangulate its source, but it defies all our equipment. Mark is agitated. Jessica is quiet. Too quiet. She keeps staring into the deeper woods, as if she sees something we don't. She says she can feel it. Asterisk. David's eyes widened, his mind racing to connect the dots. Jessica's odd behavior, her silences, her apparent connection to the woods on the recordings. She wasn't just quiet, she was attuned. She was feeling what Emily was struggling to describe. He turned to the final entry, the ink smeared, as if written in haste or distress. Asterisk day date illegible. The hum is constant now. And it's not alone. There are whispers. Not voices, not exactly. More like the echo of words, distorted, fragmented. And they're getting closer. Mark tried to pack up, insisted we leave immediately. Jessica just stood there, staring, a strange smile on her face. She said we couldn't leave. She said it wouldn't let us. Then she walked into the trees. Just walked away. Mark ran after her. I don't know what to do. The whispers are calling. They're calling me. I can feel it. A pull. Like a hungry mouth. I have to go after them. I have to understand. But I'm so scared. So cold. The silence, it's not silent anymore. It's full of teeth. Asterisk. The words blurred before David's eyes, a chilling testament to Emily's final moments of terror and desperate curiosity. Full of teeth. It wasn't just a metaphor, it was a primal scream of realization. Whatever was in these woods, whatever caused the hum and the whispers, was not benign. It was predatory, and it had taken them. As David absorbed the horrific implication, a faint, almost imperceptible vibration started beneath his fingertips, where they rested on the damp earth. It was a low, resonant thrum, a deep, pervasive hum that seemed to emanate from the very core of the forest. It wasn't loud, not yet, but it was undeniably there. A subtle tremor that resonated through the ground, up his arms and directly into his chest. The hum. Emily's hum. It was no longer a theoretical concept from a faded journal entry. It was real. It was here. And it was growing stronger, pulsing with a slow, deliberate rhythm, like the heartbeat of some colossal, slumbering entity waking up. The air around him suddenly felt heavier, the temperature dropping several degrees in an instant. The shadows beneath the trees seemed to deepen, to stretch and writhe, taking on a life of their own. David scrambled to his feet, clutching Emily's journal and locket. He looked around wildly, his eyes now wide with unadulterated terror. The hum was everywhere, a low guttural vibration that filled the void of the silence, a sound that felt both ancient and impossibly close. It was inside him, vibrating in his bones, making his teeth ache. He had found the truth, or at least a horrifying glimpse of it. And now the truth had found him. The woods were no longer waiting. They were responding. The hum was a summons, a warning, or perhaps an embrace. He was no longer trying to escape. He was trapped. The forest, with its newfound voice, was closing in, and whatever Emily had called teeth was about to be revealed. He had to keep moving, not to escape, but to find what? What could possibly explain this? What could possibly fight this? His gaze fell on a faint, almost imperceptible path winding deeper into the woods, a path that looked less like an animal trail and more like something worn. A path that Emily, Mark, and Jessica might have taken. A path that felt like the only way forward now. I took a deep breath, the metallic tang of fear already prickling the back of my throat. The path was barely there, a whisper of disturbed leaves and flattened earth, but it was undeniable. It wasn't the haphazard trail of a lost hiker, but something purposeful, almost maintained. Each step felt heavy, pushing against the oppressive silence that seemed to grow thicker with every tree I passed. The air itself felt different here, colder, somehow heavier, devoid of the usual forest hum. No chirping birds, no buzzing insects, not even the distant cry of a hawk. Just the crunch of my own boots on the leaf litter, a sound that echoed too loudly in the vacuum of the woods. The path curved, twisting around ancient oaks and gnarled maples, leading me deeper, ever deeper. I kept my eyes peeled, sweeping the undergrowth for any sign, any forgotten wrapper, any broken branch that might tell me they had been here. Then I saw it. Tucked beneath a cluster of ferns, half hidden by a moss-covered log, was a small bright blue plastic water bottle. It was one of those reusable sports bottles, the kind Emily always carried. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't just a random piece of litter. It was theirs. I picked it up, feeling the plastic still cool to the touch. It wasn't old, wasn't weathered. They hadn't been gone that long. A fresh wave of urgency mixed with a chilling dread washed over me. I pressed on, gripping the bottle, a tangible link to my friends. The path, though still faint, became slightly more defined now, as if more traffic had passed over this specific stretch. And the silence, it was no longer just the absence of sound. It was an active presence, a weight that pressed down, muffling my own thoughts, making my ears ring. I found myself straining to hear anything at all, but there was nothing. It was unnatural. Felt wrong. Every instinct screamed at me to turn back, to run. But the image of Emily's water bottle, the thought of Mark and Jessica, propelled me forward. After what felt like an eternity, the trees began to thin slightly, and a faint, almost sickly light filtered through the canopy. The path opened into a small circular clearing, but it wasn't a natural clearing. The trees around the perimeter weren't just spaced out. They looked like they had been pushed back, or perhaps had simply withered away from the center. The ground was strangely bare, not covered in leaves or undergrowth, but in a fine, almost ash-like dust that shimmered faintly in the dim light. And in the very center of this unsettling circle stood something that made my blood run cold. It was a structure, but unlike anything I had ever seen. Not a cabin, not a shack, not even a geological formation. It was a cluster of tall, dark, almost obsidian-like monoliths, roughly hewn, rising perhaps 15 feet into the air. They were arranged in a tight, irregular spiral, leaning inward, as if about to collapse on themselves, yet standing firm. There were no carvings, no apparent openings, no discernible purpose. They were just there, black against the muted greens and browns of the woods, absorbing what little light there was. They hummed, not with an audible sound, but with a low vibrational frequency that I felt more in my bones than heard with my ears. It was a feeling of immense, ancient power, dormant yet palpable, felt utterly alien. As I cautiously approached the edge of the clearing, my eyes scanned the ground, and then I saw them. Scattered around the base of the outermost monoliths were various items. A brightly colored backpack, undeniably Mark's, lay discarded near one. Its flap was open, contents spilling out: a map, a compass, a half-eaten energy bar. Further along, a small silver locket, glinting dully in the strange light, caught my eye. Jessica's locket. I'd seen her wear it 100 times. And then, near the center, almost reverently placed at the base of the largest, darkest monolith, was a small, worn leather journal. Emily's journal, the one she always carried, filled with her observations, her thoughts, her sketches. My breath hitched. They had been here. They had been right here. But where were they now? The air around the monoliths felt charged, heavy, almost electric. I could feel the hair on my arms standing on end. The silence here was absolute, deeper than anywhere else in the woods. It was as if the monoliths themselves were absorbing all sound, all life, all energy. My hand instinctively went to the cassette player in my pocket. I pulled it out, my fingers fumbling slightly. The tape was still in it, the one I had found. I looked from the player to the journal, then back to the monolith. What had happened here? What had they found? Had they recorded something here? The idea was chilling. I had to know. I had to listen. With trembling hands I pressed play. The familiar hiss of static filled the immediate space around me, loud in the overwhelming silence of the clearing. Then a click and Emily's voice, faint but clear, broke through the static. "Day 3, she whispered, her voice tight with a mixture of awe and fear. "We found it. The source. It's unbelievable. Mark thinks it's some sort of ancient pre-human structure. Jessica just keeps staring at it. She says she feels it calling to her." My eyes darted to Jessica's locket, then to Mark's open backpack. They had been here, just as Emily's voice confirmed. "The silence here," Emily continued, her voice dropping to an even lower whisper. "It's not natural. It's not just the absence of sound, David. It's like it's absorbing it. Everything. Even our thoughts. We tried to leave, but the path keeps leading us back. We can't find our way out. It's like the woods themselves are changing, twisting around us." A cold knot formed in my stomach. They were trapped, and the woods were actively preventing their escape. Then a new sound emerged on the tape, subtle at first, almost imperceptible beneath Emily's strained breathing. A low rhythmic hum, the same vibrational hum I was feeling right now from the monoliths. It grew louder on the recording, a deep resonant thrum that seemed to vibrate through the very air, through my chest, through the ground beneath my feet. Emily's breathing became ragged, frantic. "It's getting stronger," she gasped. "The hum. It's pulling us in. I can feel it. Jessica, she's moving towards it. Mark, stop her." A muffled thud, a shout, then a desperate cry from Mark, distorted by the growing hum. "Emily, don't look at the light. Don't look." The hum intensified on the recording, becoming an unbearable, piercing drone. It was no longer a vibration. It was a sound, a maddening frequency that seemed to tear at the fabric of reality. Emily screamed, a short, sharp, terrified sound that was abruptly cut off. Then only the deafening, pulsating hum remained on the tape. A sound so profound it felt like it was inside my head, rattling my teeth, shaking my very bones. My hand flew to the player, slamming the stop button. The silence that followed was not a relief. It was an even more terrifying void, now filled with the echo of Emily's scream and the lingering vibration in my skull. I stood there, frozen, the cassette player clutched in my hand, staring at the black monoliths, at the discarded items of my friends. They had been here. They had faced something unspeakable. And now I was standing in the exact same spot, feeling the exact same hum, hearing the exact same silence. The woods hadn't just taken them, they had absorbed them. And now I was next. The path behind me, the one that led here, seemed to have vanished, swallowed by the encroaching shadows and the unnerving absolute quiet. I was trapped. Every instinct screamed at me to turn, to run back the way I came. But there was no way. The trees, once distinct landmarks, had blurred into an indistinguishable wall of green and brown, their twisted branches laced together like the fingers of some ancient, grasping hand. I spun in a slow circle, my heart hammering against my ribs, each breath a ragged gasp that felt deafening in the profound stillness. The air itself felt heavy, thick, as if it had absorbed all sound, all vibration, all life. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum pressing in on my eardrums, making my head throb with a phantom hum. Panic, cold and sharp, began to set in. I called out, a desperate, hoarse whisper. "Hello? Is anyone there?" My voice, usually clear and resonant, was swallowed instantly, dissolved by the immense quiet before it even reached the nearest tree. It was like shouting into a pillow or a void. A shiver traced its way down my spine, not from cold, but from the utter isolation of that moment. I pulled out my phone, a futile gesture. No signal. The screen, a beacon of light in the deepening gloom, seemed to mock me. Even its battery indicator, usually robust, was flickering precariously low, a phenomenon I'd never experienced so rapidly. It was as if the woods were actively draining me, and everything around me, of energy. I had to move. Standing still felt like waiting for a predator to pounce from the invisible shadows. I chose a direction, any direction, and began to push through the undergrowth, each twig snap under my boots sounding like a gunshot in the oppressive quiet. The trees grew denser, older, their bark gnarled and covered in thick moss. There were no animal sounds, no rustling leaves from a passing breeze, no distant hum of civilization, just the rhythmic thud of my own terrified heart and the rasp of my breathing. As I walked, a peculiar sensation began to creep over me. It wasn't just the absence of sound. It was a feeling of being watched, an intense, almost physical pressure on my skin. My peripheral vision played tricks on me, dark shapes seeming to flit between the tree trunks, only to vanish when I focused. My sense of direction warped and I found myself constantly second-guessing my path, convinced I was walking in circles. The woods felt alive, not with flora and fauna, but with something else entirely, something ancient and malevolent that thrived in the absolute silence. Then, through a particularly dense thicket of thorny bushes, I saw it. A break in the canopy, a sudden unnatural clearing. It wasn't round or oval, or irregular like most clearings. It was a perfect, almost geometric circle, as if someone had taken a gigantic compass and drawn it on the earth. The trees surrounding it stood tall and straight, forming an impenetrable wall, their branches refusing to extend into the perfect void. And within this circle, the silence was even more profound, a tangible entity that seemed to vibrate in the very air. Hesitantly, I stepped into the clearing. The ground beneath my feet was surprisingly bare, devoid of the usual undergrowth, just packed earth and a few scattered, colorless leaves. In the exact center of this unnatural space, almost like an altar, sat a single object. A backpack. It was a simple faded hiking pack, clearly old but remarkably intact. A jolt went through me. This wasn't just a random discovery. This had to be from one of them. My hands trembled as I approached it, the silence amplifying every rustle of my clothes, every beat of my pulse. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the rough fabric. It felt cold, oddly cold, despite the temperate air. I carefully unzipped the main compartment. Inside, nestled amongst a few moldy granola bar wrappers and a water bottle, was a small leather-bound journal. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. A direct link. I pulled out the journal, its pages yellowed with age, but the script inside still legible. The handwriting was neat, feminine. I recognized the name scrawled on the inside cover. Emily. Emily Hayes. She was one of the earliest recorded disappearances, a student from a nearby university, known for her meticulous note-taking and love of nature. She had vanished almost 2 decades ago. I flipped to the first entry, my eyes scanning the faded ink. Asterisk August 14th. Day 1 in the Blackwood Forest. The local legends are intriguing, but I'm here for the flora and fauna. The silence they talk about is certainly unique, almost peaceful. A welcome escape from city noise. Asterisk. I continued to read, my mind racing. Asterisk August 16th. The silence here is unlike anything I've ever experienced. It's not just the absence of sound, it feels like a presence. A deep, quiet hum that's almost subliminal. I've tried recording it, but my equipment picks up nothing. Just nothingness. Asterisk. Asterisk August 19th. Getting disoriented. Keep losing track of time. My compass seems to spin sometimes and my phone battery dies far too quickly. I feel drained, almost lethargic. The piece is turning into something else. Something heavy. Asterisk. Asterisk August 22nd. I think I'm being watched. Not by animals. By the silence itself. Feels like it's listening. Or waiting. Every time I try to talk, my voice just vanishes. It's not an echo, it's an absorption. The woods are swallowing sound. Asterisk. My blood ran cold. Emily was describing exactly what I was experiencing now. The draining battery, the vanishing voice, the sense of being watched. This wasn't just a forest. It was something else. Asterisk August 24th. I found a clearing today. Perfect circle. The silence inside it is absolute. Terrifying. I felt a pulling sensation, like something wanted me to stay, to become part of the quiet. I fought it, but it was strong. I don't know if I can leave. Asterisk. I was standing in that exact clearing. My eyes darted around, the perfect circular wall of trees seeming to lean in, to observe me. The oppressive stillness intensified, pressing in on my chest, making it hard to breathe. The air in the clearing felt colder, heavier, as if all warmth had been sucked out of it, along with all sound. I continued reading Emily's journal, dread coiling tighter in my gut. August 26. It's not just silence. It's a hunger. The woods, they feed on sound, on energy, on life. That's why people disappear. They don't just get lost, they get consumed, absorbed. The silence isn't empty. It's full of what it has taken. I hear whispers now, not with my ears but inside my head. Faint, ethereal echoes of everything it has swallowed. I gasped, a small choked sound that again was instantly devoured by the profound quiet. Whispers. Not with her ears but inside her head? A cold dread began to solidify into terror. I was hearing nothing but the idea, the chilling thought, seemed to reverberate through my skull. August 28th. I can't fight it anymore. The silence is pulling me in. It's comforting in a twisted way, promising release, promising a final absolute quiet. I feel myself fading, my memories blurring. I'm becoming part of the chorus of the unheard. I think I understand now. It's not just absorbing sound. It's absorbing consciousness. It's absorbing us. The last entry was barely legible, the handwriting shaky, trailing off into a frantic, almost desperate scribble. August 29th. They are all here. Michael, Jessica, David. They're all part of the silence. And now it's time for me to join them. The ultimate quiet. The final. The page ended abruptly, the last word incomplete. A stark, terrifying void. My hand shook so violently I almost dropped the journal. Emily, Michael, Jessica, David. They hadn't just disappeared. They had been absorbed. This entire forest, this silent woods, was not just a place where sound died. It was a living, breathing, consuming entity. And I was standing in its heart, in the very clearing where Emily had made her final chilling entry, where she had been swallowed whole. Suddenly, the absolute silence in the clearing shifted. It wasn't a sound but a feeling, a subtle, almost imperceptible deepening of the quiet. It was like a breath being held, a vacuum tightening around me. The air grew colder still, and the shadows under the surrounding trees seemed to lengthen and writhe, even though the light above hadn't changed. I felt a distinct pressure, not just on my eardrums, but on my very mind, a subtle, insidious pull, urging me to let go, to surrender, to embrace the profound stillness. This wasn't just a physical trap. It was a psychological one, an assault on my senses, on my sanity. The woods weren't just taking bodies, they were taking minds, memories, souls. And I could feel it reaching for mine. The path behind me hadn't vanished. It had never truly existed. I had walked into a trap, a meticulously laid snare that had been waiting for its next victim for decades. I was not just trapped in the woods, I was trapped by the woods. And the silence, the profound, consuming silence, was about to claim me too. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stealing the air from my lungs and sending a jolt of pure, unadulterated terror through every nerve ending. A trap. Not just a lost hike, not just a dead phone, but a deliberate, intricate snare, laid with a chilling patience that spanned decades. My mind raced, frantically searching for an exit, for a flaw in this invisible cage. I spun around, my eyes darting through the dense canopy, trying to pierce the gloom, to find the boundary of whatever held me. But there was nothing. Just trees. Endless, identical trees that seemed to lean in, their branches weaving a tighter and tighter net above me, blotting out the sky. And the silence. Oh, the silence. It wasn't just the absence of sound anymore. It was a presence, a heavy shroud pressing down, muffling my own panicked breaths, absorbing the frantic thumping of my heart until even that felt muted, distant, as if happening to someone else far away. Each step I took felt wrong, the ground shifting imperceptibly beneath me, the compass useless, the sun a distant, mocking smear above the thick foliage. My sense of direction, usually reliable, had utterly dissolved. North, south, east, west. They were just words, meaningless anchors in a world unmoored. I tried to shout, to break the oppressive quiet, but my voice felt weak, swallowed almost immediately, leaving only a faint echo in my own ears, a ghostly whisper that seemed to mock my futile attempts. It was as if sound itself was being drained from the air, pulled away by an unseen force, leaving a vacuum where echoes and reverberations should be. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw at my throat. This wasn't just about survival, it was about sanity. I stumbled, my foot catching on a thick, gnarled root hidden beneath a carpet of leaves, and fell hard, the impact sending a shockwave up my spine, rattling my teeth and stealing the breath from my lungs in a ragged gasp. For a moment, all I could taste was dirt and the metallic tang of fear. As I lay there, gasping, my hand instinctively went to the recorder in my pocket. The cassette. The one that started all of this. What else was on it? What horrors had Emily recorded before the silence claimed her too? Or was it more than just Emily? The thought sent a fresh wave of dread through me. My fingers fumbled with the tiny buttons, the plastic cold and slick with sweat against my skin. I pressed play, the faint hiss of the tape a jarring intrusion in the absolute quiet. And then a new voice, faint and distorted, but unmistakably different. Not Emily. A man. His words were broken, interspersed with static, punctuated by ragged breaths. But the terror in his voice was palpable, raw, and utterly contagious. He was talking about them. They listen. The voice crackled, barely audible over the tape hiss. The silence. It's not empty. It's full of them. They feed on sanity, on hope. You can't scream, they take the sound, they take you. His voice faded into a guttural sob, followed by a sound I couldn't place. A low, resonant thrumming, like a giant ancient heart beating deep within the earth, but so faint, so subtle, that it seemed to exist just at the edge of hearing, threatening to slip away entirely. It was the sound behind the silence, the true nature of the oppressive quiet. It wasn't an absence, it was a filter, a distortion field designed to isolate, to disorient, to drive mad. This wasn't just a quiet patch of woods. It was an active, predatory environment. I ripped the headphones off, the thrumming fading instantly, but the feeling of it, the memory of it, lingered in my bones, a phantom vibration. So this was it. This was the trap. Not a physical cage, but a psychological one, amplified by some unseen, unheard force that twisted perception and devoured sound. The woods weren't just silent, they were predatory. They were alive. And whatever they were here, lurking in the auditory void, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. A cold dread, far deeper than any panic I'd felt before, seeped into my core. It wasn't just about getting lost. It was about being hunted, being processed. I scrambled to my feet, my muscles aching, my head throbbing. Every shadow seemed to stretch, every rustle of leaves, if there even were rustles, felt like a whisper of something observing me. My mind, already frayed by exhaustion and fear, began to play tricks. I saw movement in my peripheral vision, quick, fleeting blurs that vanished when I turned my head. Was it the trees? Or was it them? The air grew heavier, colder, despite the sun still being vaguely visible above the canopy, a pale, indifferent eye. A strange metallic taste filled my mouth like old blood or rust. My ears began to ring, a high-pitched whine that cut through the external silence, a sound only I could hear. It was like my own auditory system was rebelling, trying to create sound where there was none, or perhaps it was the sound of the barrier itself pressing in, compressing my senses, preparing them for something worse. I had to get out. I had to break free from this auditory prison. But how? My phone was dead. My compass was useless. Shouting was pointless. The only thing I had left was the cassette recorder, the very device that had led me into this nightmare. And now perhaps the only thing that offered a sliver of understanding, a fragile thread of connection to the outside world, or at least to the truth of this one. I looked at the recorder in my hand, the plastic shell a stark contrast to the organic chaos around me. The tape. It contained the sounds of the woods, the distorted voices, the unsettling thrum. What if the key wasn't to escape the silence but to understand it or even to use it? The man on the tape had talked about them listening. What if I could listen back, not just to the tape but through it to the true nature of the silence? I rewound the tape, searching for any other fragments, any other clues. The hiss continued, then a different segment. A woman's voice, barely a whisper, filled with a chilling resignation. They won't let us leave. Not until we become part of the chorus. Chorus? The word hung in the air, a phantom sound in the real silence. What chorus? The thrumming? The distorted sounds? Was it a metaphor, or something far more sinister, something literal that required participation? My mind struggled to grasp the implications, but the sheer terror of the statement resonated deeper than any explanation could. As I listened, a strange sensation began to creep over me. A subtle vibration, not from the recorder, but from the ground beneath my feet. It was faint at first, then grew stronger, a low rhythmic pulse that resonated through my bones, vibrating up my legs, through my torso, into my very skull. It was the thrumming, the ancient heartbeat of the woods, no longer just a faint sound on the tape, but a palpable force growing louder, closer, everywhere. The metallic taste in my mouth intensified, and the ringing in my ears became a piercing shriek. My heart pounded not with fear alone, but with a primal, inescapable dread. The silence wasn't just claiming me, it was consuming me. And the chorus, whatever it was, felt like it was about to begin its performance, with me as the unwilling final note. I was no longer just listening to the woods. The woods were listening to me, and they were calling me to join their song of eternal silence. The chilling realization didn't paralyze me, it propelled me. Every fiber of my being screamed for escape, for sanity, for the mundane world I'd so carelessly abandoned. But another force, far more ancient and insidious, had taken root deep within me. It was a gravitational pull, an irresistible current dragging me back to the very heart of the darkness I'd sought to unravel. My hands, trembling but resolute, found my car keys. My feet, heavy with dread yet light with an unnatural urgency, carried me to the door. The familiar comfort of my home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a cage, too small to contain the expanding horror that had become my reality. The woods were not just calling, they were demanding. The drive was a blur. The highway signs, the passing cars, the familiar landmarks, all dissolved into a hazy backdrop against the insistent rhythm thrumming in my ears. It wasn't just the cassette playing in my mind. It was as if the very air in my car was vibrating with those dissonant hums, those barely there whispers. Each mile closer to the silent woods felt like a step deeper into a dream, or perhaps a nightmare from which I might never awaken. I tried to rationalize, to tell myself it was exhaustion, stress, a vivid imagination finally snapping under the strain. But the cold dread clinging to my bones was too real, the sense of impending doom too absolute. This wasn't a choice, it was an obligation. I parked my car at the trailhead, the same spot where I'd begun this descent into madness months ago. The late afternoon sun, usually a comforting presence, now cast long skeletal shadows through the dense canopy, making the woods appear even more forbidding. The air was still, unnervingly so. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, none of the usual symphony of nature. Only that profound, suffocating silence that had given the woods their chilling name. Except now I knew better. The silence was a deception, a veil over something far more insidious. As I stepped out, the chill hit me, an unnatural cold that seemed to emanate from the very trees themselves, seeping into my skin, into my bones. I clutched the old cassette player, the one I'd retrieved from the woods, its plastic casing now feeling like a talisman against an unseen evil. I had to go back. I had to know. The question wasn't if I would find answers, but what those answers would demand of me. I pushed deeper into the woods, following the faint, overgrown path I'd carved during my previous excursions. Each step was a battle against my own instincts, against the primal fear that screamed at me to turn back, to run, to never look upon this place again. But the other force, the one that had hijacked my will, was stronger. It whispered promises of understanding, of revelation, of finally putting an end to the haunting echoes that had consumed my life. The trees grew thicker, their branches interlacing overhead, blocking out the last vestiges of daylight. The woods became a labyrinth of shadows, the path barely discernible. It wasn't long before I lost it entirely, relying instead on a gut feeling, an almost magnetic pull towards a specific, undefined point. The sounds, once subtle, began to intensify. They weren't just in my head anymore. They were all around me. A low, resonant hum like a distant, enormous bell. A multi-layered whisper, just beyond the edge of comprehension, but undeniably present. And that chorus, that awful, beautiful, terrifying chorus, began to swell. It wasn't just voices. It was a symphony of alien frequencies, a blend of human-like tones and something utterly non-human, something ancient and vast. It resonated not just in my ears but in my chest, a vibration that shook me to my core. It felt like the woods themselves were singing, and their song was a lament, a warning, and an invitation all at once. An invitation to what I dreaded to consider. I stumbled through the undergrowth, my breath catching in my throat. The air grew heavier, thicker, as if I were moving through water. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the wood's slow, deliberate rhythm. Then, through a break in the dense foliage, I saw it. Not the clearing I'd found before, but something else, something new. It was a small, almost perfectly circular depression in the earth, surrounded by a ring of gnarled ancient oak trees. Their branches twisted upwards like grasping claws, their bark scarred and dark. In the center of this natural amphitheater, something glinted. My legs, despite their exhaustion, carried me forward with renewed purpose, a horrifying curiosity overriding all caution. As I drew closer, the glint resolved into an object. It was a small metallic box, half buried in the damp earth. It looked old, tarnished with age and exposure, but undeniably man-made. I knelt, my fingers trembling as I reached out and brushed away the soil. It was heavy, surprisingly so, and intricately latched. A sense of profound unease washed over me. This wasn't merely a discovery. It felt like a trap, carefully set, waiting for me to spring it. The chorus around me swelled, a cacophony of sound that threatened to shatter my eardrums. Yet somehow I found myself compelled to open it. The latch was stiff, resisting my efforts. My mind raced, trying to process what this could be. A time capsule? A relic from the missing hikers? Or something far, far older? With a grunt of effort, I forced it open. Inside, nestled on a bed of decaying leaves and earth, was not what I expected. No treasure, no ancient artifact, no diary. Instead, there was another cassette player, identical to the one I held in my hand, but pristine, as if it had been placed there only moments ago. And beside it, a single unmarked cassette tape. My blood ran cold. The identical player, the unmarked tape, it was too perfect, too deliberate. It was a mirror, a twisted reflection of my journey, placed here for me to find, almost as if they knew I was coming, knew I would be drawn here. I picked up the new cassette. It felt heavier than it should, imbued with a silent, potent energy. The chorus in the woods reached a fever pitch, an overwhelming wave of sound and vibration that made my vision swim. It wasn't just a recording. It was a live performance happening all around me, inside me. With trembling hands, I ejected the old, worn tape from my own player and inserted the new one. The click echoed in the surreal silence that followed the chorus's sudden, abrupt cessation. The woods fell utterly silent once more. A vacuum of sound, even more unnerving than the earlier cacophony. Every nerve ending in my body screamed. I pressed play. A hiss of static, then a single clear voice. It wasn't the multi-layered chorus, nor the whispers. It was a human voice, a woman's voice, calm and measured, but with an underlying tremor of despair. My name is Emily. If anyone finds this, please understand. The woods are not silent. They listen. They learn. They imitate. We thought we were discovering something ancient, a forgotten language. But we were just being recorded. Our fears, our hopes, our dreams, our screams. My breath hitched. Emily, a common American name. One of the missing. Her voice so clear, so real, yet imbued with an impossible sense of distance, as if speaking from across a vast chasm of time or existence. They mimic, her voice continued, a new note of terror creeping in. They take what they hear and they twist it. They lure you in with your own echoes. The chorus, it's us. It's everyone who has ever entered these woods and truly listened. They've taken our voices, our very essence, and woven them into their song. They want you to join. They want you to add your voice. A profound, sickening realization dawned on me. The whispers, the hums, the chorus that had consumed my life. It wasn't just from the woods. It was the woods. And it was made of people. Of missing people. Of Emily. And now of me. They drew us deeper. Emily's voice was breaking now, a sob catching in her throat. They showed us things that broke our minds. Visions. Memories that weren't ours. They promised understanding, but they only delivered oblivion. They promised to make you part of something eternal. But eternity here, it's not peace. It's an endless silent scream, amplified by 1,000 others, played back for the next unsuspecting soul. A new sound began to emerge from the tape, subtle at first, then growing louder, overwhelming Emily's faltering voice. It was a familiar sound, my own breathing, my own frantic heartbeat, and then undeniably my own voice, distorted, echoing, saying things I hadn't said, words I hadn't thought, woven into the fabric of the growing chorus. The woods around me were no longer silent. They were singing my song, my fear, my despair. The air vibrated with my own anxieties, amplified, twisted, thrown back at me. I was experiencing the chorus not just as a listener, but as a participant. My voice, my very essence, was being absorbed, becoming another layer in the horrifying symphony of the silent woods. Emily's voice, now a mere whisper beneath the rising tide of the chorus, spoke her final words. Don't listen. Don't play it. For God's sake, don't join the chorus. But it was too late. My own voice, clearer now, more dominant within the cacophony, began to echo the words I had just heard, the questions I had asked, the fears I had harbored. The woods were not just playing back Emily's confession. They were playing back my entire journey, my obsession, my descent. And then a new set of sounds began to emerge from the tape, from the woods themselves. Not voices, but a deep, resonant thrumming, a vibration that seemed to come from beneath the earth itself, growing in intensity, shaking the very ground I stood on. The trees around me began to sway, not from wind but from this unseen force. The air crackled with an energy that felt ancient, malevolent, and incredibly powerful. I was no longer just listening to a recording. I was at the epicenter of a living, breathing, consuming entity, and it had finally found its newest voice. The realization hit me like a physical blow, stripping my lungs of air. My muscles seized, and a cold sweat erupted across my skin, chilling me to the bone even as my heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs. No, my mind screamed the word, a desperate, futile protest against the horrifying truth. This wasn't just a story I was unraveling. It was a trap, meticulously laid across decades, across lives, and I had walked right into its gaping maw. My hand, numb and clumsy, shot out, fumbling for the cassette player's stop button. I had to end it, sever the connection, drown out the encroaching malevolence. But my fingers, slick with terror, slipped. The button seemed to recede, mockingly out of reach. I pressed harder, my nails scraping against the plastic, but nothing happened. The tape continued to spin, the faint whirring sound now amplified. A sinister hum beneath the rising tide of static and whispers that were no longer just coming from the speakers. They were everywhere. The air in my small apartment thickened, growing heavy and oppressive, as if an invisible weight had settled upon my chest, pressing the very breath from my lungs. The faint glow of my desk lamp seemed to flicker, struggling against an encroaching darkness that had no visible source. Shadows elongated, twisting into grotesque shapes in the periphery of my vision, dancing with a malicious glee that made my blood run cold. A profound, unnatural chill permeated the room, seeping into my bones, a cold that felt deeper than any winter night, a cold that felt ancient and predatory. The whispers intensified, no longer distinct words, but an echoing chorus of despair, a cacophony of lost voices swirling around me, through me. I heard Daniel's frantic gasps, Mrs. Albright's choked sobs, and countless others I couldn't place, all woven into a tapestry of pure, unadulterated terror. Each whisper seemed to brush against my sanity, 1,000 tiny needles pricking at the edges of my mind, threatening to unravel the very fabric of my being. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palms against my ears, desperate to block it out, to find a pocket of silence in the overwhelming onslaught. But it was useless. The sounds weren't just coming from outside. They were resonating within me, a chilling symphony conducted in the very chambers of my skull. Then a new voice emerged from the chaos, distinct and chillingly clear, yet formless, a thought without a speaker, a presence without a body. It was not a whisper, but a resonant hum that vibrated through my bones, a voice that spoke directly to the deepest, most primal parts of my fear. Asterisk, you hear us. You understand. You are ready. Asterisk, the words were not spoken aloud, but impressed upon my mind with an undeniable force, carrying with them a sense of ancient power, of knowing, of absolute control. My eyes snapped open. The room was still there, but subtly distorted. The familiar objects around me seemed to pulse faintly with an inner darkness, their edges blurring, their forms shifting just at the threshold of perception. The cassette player, still playing, glowed with a faint, malevolent light, the tape spooling with an unnerving, almost eager rhythm. It wasn't just a machine anymore. It was an extension of the entity, a conduit, a pulsing heart of the encroaching horror. A new sensation began to bloom in my chest, a strange, creeping warmth that quickly turned into an inferno, spreading through my veins, consuming me from the inside out. It wasn't a comforting warmth, but a burning compulsion, an irresistible urge welling up from deep within. My throat tightened, my jaw clenched, and I felt my own vocal cords vibrating, straining, as if trying to produce a sound that wasn't mine. The entity wanted me to speak. It wanted me to give it my voice. Speak, the silent voice commanded, resonating within my thoughts. Asterisk, tell our story. Bring us forth. Asterisk. I fought it, gritting my teeth, digging my nails into my palms until I felt the sting of pain. My rational mind screamed in defiance, rejecting the insidious suggestion, but the compulsion was overwhelming. It felt like an invisible hand was reaching into my mouth, manipulating my tongue, forcing my lips to part. A guttural sound escaped me, a strangled gasp that was neither a word nor a scream, but a desperate primal cry of resistance. My vision blurred, not from tears, but from the sheer intensity of the mental assault. Images flickered behind my eyes. The dark, oppressive canopy of the silent woods, the distorted faces of Daniel and Mrs. Albright, their eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. I saw the empty void where the entity resided, a hunger that devoured not just sound, but life, hope, and sanity. It wasn't just seeking a voice to narrate its story. It was seeking a voice to become its story, to perpetuate its cycle of consumption. And then, amidst the swirling chaos, a single crystalline thought broke through the suffocating dread. A memory, sharp and sudden, from Daniel's frantic, barely legible notes, scribbled in the margins of his journal. Asterisk, it feeds on the echo, the repetition. It grows in the telling. Asterisk, in Mrs. Albright's haunted words. Asterisk, they were trying to silence it, not just the woods but the stories. Asterisk, the entity thrived on being heard, on being recorded, on being spoken. The tapes weren't just a record of its presence. They were its nourishment, its means of spreading, its tendrils reaching out to ensnare new victims. The silence of the woods wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was the result of its insatiable hunger, devouring every sound, every whisper, every echo. And the recordings? They were the bait, the lure, the means to break that silence, not with nature's song, but with human fear. If it fed on sound, on repetition, on the echo, what if the key wasn't to silence it with more sound, but with true silence? Not the absence of noise, but the refusal to engage, to repeat, to become its mouthpiece. A desperate, reckless plan formed in my mind, a fragile thread of hope in the suffocating darkness. I had to break the cycle. I had to stop the echo. And the only way to do that was to refuse to let it speak through me, and to destroy the very medium it used to propagate. With a surge of adrenaline, fueled by a renewed, defiant terror, I lunged forward, not for the stop button, but for the cassette player itself. My hands wrapped around the plastic casing, a desperate, frantic grip. The whispers screamed louder in my head, a chorus of rage and frustration. The heat in my chest intensified, threatening to consume me entirely, to force the words from my unwilling lips. But I fought back, using every ounce of my remaining will, every spark of defiance. My fingers, still trembling, found the eject button. With a violent click, the cassette tray opened, revealing the cursed tape still spinning, still playing its insidious melody. It was glowing now, a faint, sickly green light emanating from its plastic shell, pulsating with the entity's malevolent energy. The silent voice in my head roared, a soundless scream of pure fury. Asterisk, no. Not the voice. Not the vessel. Asterisk. Ignoring the agonizing pressure in my skull, the burning in my throat, I ripped the tape from the player. It felt scorching hot in my grasp, vibrating with an unnatural energy. The whispers reached a deafening crescendo, threatening to shatter my eardrums, to splinter my mind. I could feel the entity fighting back, trying to reclaim its voice, its medium. It wanted me to put the tape back, to let it play, to let it speak. But I wouldn't. I couldn't. With a primal scream that finally tore free from my lungs, a sound of pure defiance and terror, I brought my fist down, gripping the cassette like a weapon, slamming it against the edge of my desk. The plastic casing cracked, a sharp, sickening sound that cut through the oppressive atmosphere. The tape itself, the fragile magnetic ribbon, began to unravel, spilling out like dark, twisted intestines. A deafening, soul-shattering shriek erupted, not from the speakers, not from my mind, but from the air itself, a sound that seemed to tear at the very fabric of reality. The room plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness, the desk lamp dying with a final desperate flicker. The cold intensified, becoming unbearable, an arctic blast that seemed to freeze my very blood. I was alone in the pitch black, the fragments of the cassette still clutched in my hand, the screams of the entity echoing in the vast, terrifying silence that followed. But the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with a palpable rage, a raw, consuming hatred that permeated every molecule of air around me. I had cut off its voice, shattered its vessel, but I hadn't destroyed it. And now it was truly, utterly enraged. I had stopped the echo, but I had unleashed something far more terrifying. and I was trapped in the dark with a broken tape and an ancient, furious entity that had just lost its newest voice. The air in the cabin grew instantly impossibly cold, sucking the warmth not just from the room, but from my very bones. It wasn't just a drop in temperature. It was the absence of heat, a void that felt like it was trying to consume all energy, all life. The oppressive silence that had been a hallmark of these woods returned, but it was no longer passive. It was a heavy, active silence pressing down, vibrating with a palpable fury. I could feel it, a presence that was no longer confined to the whispers on the tape, no longer tied to the static. It was everywhere, a formless, ancient evil that had been ripped from its fragile tether. The darkness in the room deepened, twisting not just shadows, but tendrils of absolute blackness that seemed to writhe at the edges of my vision. The cabin, which had felt like a refuge, now felt like a tomb, its wooden walls groaning and creaking, not from the wind, but as if the very structure was being squeezed, crushed by an unseen force. A low, guttural growl, not human, not animal, but something ancient and elemental, vibrated through the floorboards and up into my feet. It wasn't a sound I heard with my ears, but one I felt deep in my chest, rattling my teeth. My flashlight, clutched in my trembling hand, flickered, its beam suddenly weak, battling against the encroaching gloom. The broken pieces of the cassette tape lay scattered on the floor, inert plastic and magnetic ribbon, but they felt like shrapnel from an explosion, the epicenter of this unleashed terror. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I had to get out. My mind screamed at me a primal instinctual command. I scrambled backward, tripping over my own feet, the growl intensifying, a low hum that threatened to shatter my eardrums. The air grew heavier, thick, making it hard to breathe, as if the entity itself was trying to suffocate me. I pushed myself up, my eyes darting around the cabin. David's notes, the half-eaten cans of food, Sarah's faded scarf hanging on a hook. They all seemed to mock me now, remnants of lives that had dared to disturb this place. The door. That was my only way out. I stumbled towards it, my flashlight beam dancing erratically, revealing fleeting glimpses of shifting shadows that seemed to coalesce and dissipate just beyond the light's reach. The growl was now a constant, vibrating thrum, and I could feel a crushing pressure on my chest, as if an invisible weight was pressing me down. Each step was an effort, like walking through quicksand. My hand fumbled for the doorknob, my fingers slick with sweat. It was cold, unnaturally cold, as if the entity's presence had seeped into the metal. I twisted it, pushed, and the door opened with a protesting groan, revealing a night outside that was even darker than the cabin. The moon, I realized, was completely obscured, the sky a bruised, starless black. The woods were not just silent. They were dead. No crickets, no rustling leaves, just an absolute, suffocating stillness that amplified the internal vibration of the entity's rage. I burst out, not even bothering to close the door behind me. The cold hit me like a physical blow, a deeper, more profound chill that seemed to penetrate my clothes and skin. I could feel eyes on me, countless unseen eyes, watching from the impenetrable darkness of the trees. The growl was louder now, closer, and I could swear I heard faint, discordant whispers, not words but pure, malicious sound, swirling around me like a vortex. My truck. It was my only hope. I sprinted, my feet pounding on the soft earth, each step a desperate plea for escape. The path to the truck felt impossibly long, stretching out into an endless tunnel of darkness. My flashlight beam, weak as it was, cut a struggling path forward, but the shadows seemed to stretch and twist, reaching for me from the periphery. I could feel it behind me now, not a physical chase but a pressure, a dread that grew with every stride. The air grew colder still, and I felt a sharp, burning sensation on the back of my neck, as if invisible claws were raking my skin. I didn't dare look back. I just ran, fueled by pure, unadulterated terror. Finally, the silhouette of my truck loomed into view, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. I tore open the driver's side door, practically throwing myself inside, fumbling for the keys in my pocket. My hands were shaking so violently, I could barely insert the key into the ignition. The engine, usually a reliable purr, groaned on the first turn, then caught with a sputtering cough. The sound, a sudden burst of mechanical noise, seemed to momentarily push back the oppressive silence. I slammed the door shut, locking it, a futile gesture against something so ancient and pervasive, but it made me feel marginally safer. The growl from outside intensified, a continuous, deafening roar that vibrated through the truck's chassis. I jammed the truck into reverse, stomping on the accelerator. The tires spun, kicking up gravel, and the truck lurched backward. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a split second I saw it. Not a shape, not a form, but a distortion in the darkness. A deeper, more absolute void, swirling and coalescing just beyond the cabin, where the trees began. It was a hole in reality, a gaping maw of pure malevolence, and it was focused entirely on me. I slammed the truck into drive, flooring it. The headlights cut through the oppressive darkness, a fragile shield against the terror. I sped down the narrow, winding dirt road, the truck fishtailing, branches scraping against the sides, but I didn't care. I just needed to get out. The growl seemed to follow me, a low vibration that resonated through the truck's frame, even as the distance grew. The cold, however, began to recede slowly, incrementally. The pressure on my chest eased. The air in the truck, though still chilly, felt breathable again. I didn't slow down until I hit the paved road, far beyond the boundary of the national forest. Only then did I dare to pull over, my heart hammering against my ribs, my entire body trembling uncontrollably. I leaned my head against the steering wheel, gasping for breath. The image of that swirling void burned into my mind. I sat there for what felt like hours, the truck's engine idling, the warmth of the heater slowly returning circulation to my frozen limbs. I was out. I had escaped. But the silence of those woods, the malevolent, active silence, was a sound I knew I would never truly unhear. I never went back to the cabin. I never tried to find David or Sarah. I reported the cabin to the park rangers, claiming I found it abandoned, and vaguely mentioning some unsettling sensations, but I kept the truth to myself. Who would believe me? Who would believe that a broken cassette tape could unleash an ancient, formless entity from the heart of a silent forest? The woods are still there, of course. The national forest is still open to hikers and campers. But I know their true nature now. They are silent not because they are peaceful, but because something within them demands it. Something that was briefly vocal, briefly tethered, and then, because of my foolish curiosity, violently unleashed. I still have the broken pieces of the tape. I don't know why I kept them. Maybe it's a reminder, a warning. Or maybe a part of me believes that even in its shattered state, it still holds a fragment of that ancient power, a whisper of the silence it once contained, and the rage it now embodies. The woods are silent, yes, but it's not the silence of peace. It's the silence of a predator, watchful, waiting, and forever listening for a new voice to fill the void I created. And I, for one, will never dare to disturb that silence again.